Brought together by National Council for the Safeguarding of the Country, we have decided to put an end to the regime that you know. This follows the continuing deterioration of the security situation and poor economic and social governance.
Today on the Roundtable, we shall consider the nation's three biggest stories and West Africa's biggest story. We are considering the Niger coup and followed closely, by subsidy protests and the presidential address. And we'll be looking at the ministerial screening, the aircraft crash, and the elevator death. My name is Melanie Ishola. Joining me this afternoon are two distinguished journalists, Adedayo Oketola, the editor of The Punch. And I also have with me Femi Morgan. Gentlemen, welcome.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
All right.
Yeah.
We get straight into the story as we begin with the Niger coup. Now, several moves have been made by ECOWAS, which is the Economic Community of West Africa, over the coup which took place in Niger on the 26th of July to restore President Mohamed Bazoum. Examples are Nigeria's cut of power supply, ECOWAS vowing to confront the junta, and a whole lot more. Even the United Nations has halted humanitarian support to Niger, calling for the military to reinstate the president. Now, the current coup plotters have blamed rising insecurity and a lack of economic growth. They stated that the intervention was necessary to avoid the gradual and inevitable demise of the country. One would then ask very quickly, that saying that this is the seventh coup in a period of 3 years on the West African part of Africa. What really are we dealing with before we even bring it home to Niger? I'm beginning with you, Adedayo. What are we dealing with the incessant coups that we see in West Africa?
Oh, thank you very much. I'm going to address this from two angles. And the first one is, the coups are coming back in West Africa because there are a lot of factors. But one very important factor that, though it's difficult to say, is the fact that Nigeria became, very weak on the diplomatic front under the last administration. And you know that by implication, a weak Nigeria is a weak West Africa. Right. A weak Nigeria is a weak ECOWAS. Nigeria is actually the big brother that is supposed to, that others are supposed to be shivering when it sneezes. So when Nigeria was no longer sneezing, it was easier for the military to come back. So, I had discussions with a number of diplomats who said that yes, under President Muhammadu Buhari, we were not on the forefront diplomatically. That's right. And we're not also a backbencher. We're just in the middle. We weren't doing so much. And once people weren't feeling that vibe, that fear that should be coming from Nigeria, it was easier for people to stage coups and grandstand and retain power. But it is important for us to know here that it is unconstitutional. What happened in Niger is unacceptable. Right. So that is the first perspective. Then the other perspective, which is a little ideological, is the fact that globally there is this contention between the liberal democratical ideas and the totalitarian tendencies represented by the U.S. and China and Russia on the other side.
There are two sides.
So so with the annexation of Crimea by Russia and what's it called, the invasion of Ukraine by Russia, without of course it has its attendant repercussions. But so far so good. You see countries like China, India, including South Africa in Africa, throwing their weight behind Russia. When you look at that contention between those tendencies, it is easier it is coming home. I mean, Africa has become like the new frontiers for these two tendencies. So the military, know that they are likely going to get the support of Russia. They're likely going to get the support of backing, whether subtle or very open. They're going to have. So they became bolder. So that's what we're dealing with. So it's both ideological and also, to a larger extent, very from the diplomatic front, because Nigeria became very, very weak on the diplomatic front. And that is why the assertiveness displayed by ECOWAS under the leadership of President Bola Tinubu, appears to be what we need at this point in time.
Thank you. Yeah. Thank you so much. So, I mean, Femi, you agree that I said a lot there, given it the ideological background and equally speaking for what the big brother Nigeria should have been under the last administration, and we seemed to have lacked in that capacity.
Yeah.
What would you say? Agree with him or not? Or exactly, I mean, you're giving us a new perspective.
For me, I think that there are many perspectives to it, and that the editor has only broached some of those perspectives. Most of these West African countries are battered countries.
Yeah.
They are in their semi-regime eras, and there are documents that show that even Nigeria is a regime, is a semi-regime. So these West African countries have gone through harrowing experiences and are still going through those traumas.
So when you say semi-regime, I'm going to bring it back there. What do you mean?
What I mean is that it's a facade of democracy.
Right.
And that facade of democracy, the structures of the institutions that are supposed to assert democratic tendencies, values and tendencies are not there. And the people are asking themselves, what kind of democracy is this? And so that encourages the military to take over and say they are taking over based on the desires of the people. Apart from security, developmental-wise, the Sahel is a contested landscape.
And I think this ties back to what Adedai was saying. I mean, you looked at how he said, let's give it a background. Let's understand that there is a pull, right, for there to not just be one world power, which is liberal in perspective, and then there is this other side.
Yes, the internal.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Which, in this case, I think the China, the Russias of this world who are tending towards the totalitarian side, who are pulling their weights for a contention on the soil of Africa to say, hey, we can do this. I mean, otherwise, how would we be able to explain Russia saying that ECOWAS should not go ahead with trying to fight military with military and all of that? I mean, I asked myself, what's it concern Russia?
Let me come in here.
Yes,
you see, after the end of the Cold War, we had a unipolar world order where America or the US was the hegemon, everybody, everybody looked up to. But in recent time, particularly, I would want to say maybe at the time Russia annexed Crimea, I would say maybe that was when we had the beginning, to the beginning of the end of the polarity, because you now have a bloc, that consists Russia, China, to a larger extent maybe India, and they also have allies here and there, including South Africa. They are seriously challenging the unipolar world order. To them, what they want us to have, the world order they want to see is something that looks like a bipolar, tripolar, or multipolar world. So when Morgan said that the Sahel is a contested landscape, yes, that's exactly what I was trying to say, the other time. That, the Sahel is contested, not just, on the political or social-political front, even ideologically.
Yes.
You can see that, of course, the Chinese have successfully made a lot of inroads in Africa.
With fundings.
Russia is coming, and you will see that if U.S. takes a step, Russia wants to take a counter step just to ensure that they are trying to chop off the American an influence that America has in West Africa. So that is why it may be difficult for ECOWAS to
be able to fight this war. But this is a war next door.
Yes.
And I think that's how I want Nigerians to look at it. Funny, how safe do you feel right now? And I think I'm bringing it again to how we have over 300,000 refugees that are citizens of Nigeria in Niger right now. And then we're looking at Nigeria breathing hard as a member, of course, a leader. I mean, our president is the chairman of ECOWAS, and he said, no, we're going to do all that we can. Already in Katsina, they're trying to block the boundaries and all of that. And a lot is going on right now. But what would you say, indeed? Would you say we go ahead, use all of the might, or we seek more diplomatic ways to resolve this?
For me, I think that we should not go into any war with Niger. It's not good for us. We are also having our own internal battles. There is IPOB in the east. There's Boko Haram here. There's ISWAP in the northeast. So we have our internal struggles, and our military might is not as strong as it used to be.
Right.
So we cannot decimate the pressure. We cannot afford to decimate the pressure. If we all say we want ECOMOG today, at least 85% of that ECOMOG will be the Nigerian soldiers. We need our Nigerian soldiers at home. So the diplomatic moves that are being made, the sanctions, should be harder. There should be harder sanctions, economic sanctions, boundary sanctions, international sanctions. Recently, the EU wanted to give Niger a particular loan, developmental loan, and it has been withdrawn.
Yeah.
Such sanctions are heavy. Another thing that I like that Barrister Falana suggested was that West African nations that are democratic should not sit in the same table with the ones that are pitching their tents with totalitarian regimes. But most importantly, the democratic regimes, apologies for saying that, but that is what they are. Democratic regimes in West Africa need to morph into proper democratic governments and dovetail the dividends of democracy to the people. Else the people will murmur to a point where there will either be an uprising or there will be an encouragement for the military to take over. There's an international dimension. There's an international funding. But if there's no internal crisis,
there is a need for us to have intrusions from outside. You're quite correct. So we move on and we're going to Nigeria. Just as you said, we get our own. So I think it's very quick, good that we go into what really concerns us right now. Subsidy protests and the presidential address. We seem to wake up this week to the news of, oh, the president is going to address us, and then people felt, oh wow, it's a much needed address, right? But off the back of that, we then woke up the next day or the days after to see mobs of Nigerians across several states of Nigeria going out en masse to demand a reversal of the subsidy regime. First question I'd ask there is, are people simply dissatisfied with the speech that the president gave in his address on Monday? Because I would expect that off the back of that, we don't go ahead and proceed with a Nigerian Labour Congress strike. And again, I'm going towards Adedayo. I seem to be pandering towards Adedayo with this conversation, Femi, if you do not mind. So let me know what your thought is regarding this. Okay, thank you.
Yes, I think what we need to know is this is about survival for the Nigerian people. A country of over 220 million people, majority of who live below the poverty line. Removing the subsidy in the first place without having, replacement that is commensurate to what you're taking away would breed tension. So people have been battling with economic, tension. That we've had serious hardships, even those of us who have been, of course, who have not been complaining openly, we know that it's been tough. So people were waiting for the president to provide some succor. A lot of people looked up to that nationwide broadcast, hoping that something substantial, would come. And to be fair to the president, within our capacity, releasing or announcing a 500 billion relief package for the people wasn't bad. But was he able to address the enormity of the problem we have?
That would be 50,000 naira for nano businesses, and what would that do in practical terms?
Yes, for nano businesses are very, very small businesses, very petty businesses. Yes, all over the places. That will go a long way considering the numbers. But bottom line is, if you look at the entire package and you look at the level of want among the Nigerian people, it was not going to scratch the surface. So that was what triggered, of course, the plan. The fact that the NLC or the labor unions would protest at some point was there. But everybody was trying to show understanding, with the government because of the need for us to remove subsidy. The need to remove subsidy is not debatable because the bottom line, it has done more damage to us as a country than good.
But the NLC wants us to debate it, and they're saying reverse the subsidy. Removal and give us back subsidy. That's what they're calling for.
Well,
do you think that is?
It is within the right of the labor unions, to make demands from the government. It is also the government's duty. The government owes the people the duty to explain to us why we have to go this route, and also, shift the ground. There must be a shifting of grounds by both parties, to work out something that Nigerians can accept. For instance, yes, the rate at which you are buying fuel now, is it sustainable Can the typical Nigerian household afford it? You know, for those, even for the typical working class, can you afford it in the long run?
The typical Nigerian household who actually lives and feeds off less than $2 a day. Because
So
that's the basis of the multidimensional poverty that Nigeria was wrecked.
yes, I agree with you. So what I'm trying to say is, yes, yeah, the protest was in order. It was that must be some kind of reaction.
But you do not agree that the reversal of subsidy is actually right for the country?
Well, I do not totally agree because I said if subsidy got over 2 trillion naira last year, and we can't, and of course we know that only very few people are benefiting from it, and people are subsidized fuel is also being smuggled to now, to our neighbors, to the neighboring countries. We can't continue that route. We're not going to go anywhere with it. But bottom line is, if you are taking something away from the poor or from the masses, what are you giving them?
As a substitute.
What are you giving them?
But the president has now offered a lot of substitutes. If I can just reel out a few. You remember where we're told that there will be 200,000 metric tons of seedlings released to farmers, over 25,000 metric tons of fertilizers released. There would be 75 billion naira for 75 businesses. There would be, and that we have saved 1 trillion naira since the subsidy regime has ended. I think this is a big gist, and I'm going to take it to Femi, because people have said, oh, do we believe this? I think that's about the biggest gist. Like, okay, so in just 2 months of relieving the economy of, paying for subsidy for fuel, we now have saved 1 trillion naira, according to the president. Some journalists have said, oh, well, we need workings, show us workings. Let's see and be able to trust that this is for real. But in the occasion this is even true, really, would you support the subsidy regime goes off, or would you pander towards what the NLC wants?
If I'm with the president, the first question I will ask is, you have saved 1 trillion naira. Where have you invested it in? What have you used the 1 trillion naira for to salvage the situation? Removal of subsidy is a no. There are no contentions. Right. Unfortunately for Labour has some socialist paradigms that are warped in old illogics. And we are in a world where we are in a competitive world of capitalism and a balance of welfarist positions. Right. But when you have hard socialist paradigms, you would say remove subsidy, government should own NNPC and all of those things. NNPC should be sold outright to a foreign company, and government should earn royalties, and government should fully regulate NNPC. NNPC is the problem of Nigeria.
Really?
Tackle NNPC.
Really?
Yes. NNPC is the problem of Nigeria. Because NNPC is the major cash cow.
Gentlemen.
NNPC is the major cash cow of the country.
Now, your point is made.
So instead of probing CBN and spending some good money, putting structures in place to probe CBN, probe NNPC.
Okay. I don't know what you have to say.
Yes, I think it is minimalist to say that NNPC is the problem of Nigeria. We have a lot of problems. And of course, we all agree that there are a lot of containing issues we need to deal with. NNPC could be one of them. You understand? So, you see, what we need to do is to find the best possible solutions to myriads of problems that we have. Yes, you sell NNPC to a foreign country, to a foreign company and end reality. It's a template. Will it be the best for Nigeria? It is left for experts, to decide. But have you looked at the NLNG template that seems to have been working? As NLNG being sold to foreign companies, is it not a partnership between government and those who have the technical capacity to deliver? So there are a lot of templates. So why I say that, of course, the intention is not to argue. The intention is to say that we have to look at all sorts of templates and let people who know better, experts, come up with what best work for Nigeria. So we have to be very careful when we make statements like NNPC is the problem of Nigeria. Yes, NNPC can be probed, CBN can be probed, any government agency can be probed because you have a mandate. If you are not living up to your mandate, you can't be probed.
For me, I'd say it's not even can be probed, but should be probed. There are a lot of them right now that should actually be undergoing probing. It is what it is. If there's been failures on different fronts, we should be taking you into account. Yeah. Explain to us what this is or why this is.
Turnaround maintenance over the years.
Right.
Governors with presidents with several years, Buhari as Minister of Petroleum,
senators that are returning and
funds that have been, at least the NNPC only declared profit since 30 years in just 1 year profit.
When was that?
I think that was during Buhari's era.
And
when
you know,
he
because you know,
declared
recently the
profit.
NNPC metamorphosed into
Yeah.
So
limited
And
liability.
before then, the NNPC has reneged in paying its funds to the federal account.
That's true.
You know, so all of those loopholes, oil is our major stake. And so if oil is not properly managed, oil theft is not properly managed, internal unaccountability is not properly managed, the issue of fuel subsidy is there, but the issue of internal issues, internal corruption is also there. You have to tackle both and block the leakages. Of course, there are other issues, like the editor said.
That's correct. So now, let me take this a bit further, and it's still the same conversation. So the president said that the defects in our economy, and that's quoting from his speech at the address on Monday, talking about the subsidy regime, immensely profited a tiny elite. In fact, it says the elite of the elite, you might call them. As we move to fight the flaws in the economy, right? The people who grow rich from them, predictably, will fight back through every means necessary. What does the president mean? And I'm looking at somebody saying the people who want to fight in the name of the elite would fight back. He's made statements a few times around fighting corruption, wanting to fight corruption and all of that. But him categorically stating this, for me, really should be looked into. I don't know, again, I'm coming to you. And yes, and I'd like to say, okay, so there's been an admittance to something, but again saying, oh, there may be a pushback. Isn't that expected? And really, is the president showing fear as to maybe when the elite of the elite fights back?
You see, when we talk about corruption fighting back or the elite fighting back, it has almost become a cliche in Nigeria. But naturally, if you have a system, a faulty system where a minority or a group of elites, is believed to be benefiting from, if you block the leakage and you take that feeding bottle from them, there will be a fight back in one way or the other. It may be subtle, it may be covert, it may be overt, but there will be a feedback. So it is left for the president to explain more what he meant by saying that they will fight back. But we all agree, it is universally agreed that if you take maybe the undue benefit of a group of people, somehow they will fight back.
Absolutely.
You understand what I'm saying? So it is expected. But like I said, subsidy, it's an ongoing debate. Meanwhile, fuel is not the only thing that's being subsidized in Nigeria.
So true.
There are good subsidies that we should retain. For instance, if you look at how much we pay or how much students pay in government universities compared to what they pay in private university, you don't need to be told that somehow there are some forms of subsidy in government.
Education.
Those are the kind of things we should subsidize. We have over 700 local governments in Nigeria. Every local government deserves a decent health center where people can go to. These are the things we should subsidize. You understand? There are a lot of issues. You can subsidize production. You can subsidize factories, production platforms that will create jobs. But you see, fuel subsidy, for instance, at some point they said daily consumption was about 50 million liters per day. But suddenly, since the removal of subsidy, that daily consumption is almost like maybe as reduced by some
almost
significant
and I think
percentage. I don't want to say by half.
Yeah.
I don't want to parrot what we're not sure of. But the bottom line is, what happened? Is it that our population has reduced? But so what I'm saying is that
even our buying power is reduced because now the costs have gone high, as we've seen it over the past
the buying power. Well, yes, the buying power. I will agree with you to a larger extent, but I'm saying that it will be too minimalistic to say that it's our buying power that is responsible for that sudden drop. It means that some people, there were so many leakages. The issue of theft is there.
You would look at how neighboring countries suddenly started to fight over fuel availability, scarcity of it at the heel of ending subsidy regime in Nigeria. There's no way these things are
people even protested in
their countries.
Yes, in their countries because encouraging the Nigerian government to return subsidy. So what we need to do is for government, and let me tell you something. If it's not important for subsidy to be dealt with, the labor union wouldn't have suddenly come to some kind of
agreement.
Not an agreement, middle ground with the government.
Okay.
You understand? So everybody is willing to give this government an opportunity to to see how far we can go.
Thank
so,
you.
Yeah,
Thank you, Adedayo. And lastly, on the subsidy issue, I just want to ask you, Femi. So, I mean, there is no way we look at the protests that took over the nation yesterday and not say, hey, this was subsidy, right? And to quickly ask, really, so it feels like it was too easy for the president to have met with the NLC yesterday evening. And this morning we heard that, hey, no more protest, y'all. I mean, and some are saying, oh, it was the initial gra-gra. We knew it wasn't going anywhere. What do you say to this as we make a wrap on this conversation?
Okay. Let me quickly talk about the elite of elites.
Yes, please.
In every organization, there are always elites, top people. The editor is elite of elites in the
Why
Punch.
did you have to cast him?
You know?
On camera.
I'm sure you know that we are live. So
Right? Is that right?
you have to be.
Yeah, the editor is elite of
very
elites in
careful
the
what you
Punch.
say.
And so in every society, there are, but we live in a country where the president has enormous powers. It's the democracy we run, the president has enormous powers. And the president is a member of the elite of elites. So we are asking the question, is it that you cannot use your administrative powers to put the right checks, or is it that you cannot properly negotiate with your group, with your people? Because every society will always have it. America has, China has, all these countries have their elites. How is it that their elites and their countries are functioning and the poor can breathe, and we have our elites and the poor cannot breathe?
Are you sure the poor...
Those are the questions.
Are you sure the poor are not breathing? Even the president came on and said, the poor, he said, let the poor breathe. Okay, on letting the poor breathe, Femi, I'm going to take this away. So we go to the next story or conversation. And that's where I've got to say thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much.
I mean,
Thanks
so
so much.
we have the ministerial screening. And at this point, I guess it's been about the biggest gist since close to a week, if not exactly a week. On Thursday, the 26th of July, the President Bola Tinubu sent in a ministerial list, which I would say is about the most awaited list of the nation at the moment. And indeed, since then, we've had an engagement of the National Assembly over the list. Now,
sector with 125 billion. Out of the sum, we will spend 50 billion conditional grant to 1 million nano businesses between now and March 24. Our target is to give a minimum of 50,000 each to 1,300 nano businesses owners in each of the 774 local governments across the country. We will fund 100,000 MSMEs and startups with 75 billion. I have ordered release of 200,000 metric tons of grains from strategic reserves to...
Of course, before the break, I hinted at the next story being on the ministerial screening. And indeed, there is, I think for me, no bigger thing to talk about than the whole take a bow of the former governor of Ebonyi State, David Umahi, as said by his colleagues. Or do I just say the Senate president when he said to him, just take a bow? And what did he say? Senator Umahi, who was the first to stand before the Senate among the 14 nominees listed for screening on Tuesday, simply said, my distinguished colleagues, let me first thank God for the journey of my life and thank Mr. President, for nominating me as a minister of the Federal Republic of Nigeria. Earlier, as I said earlier, the Senate President Godswill Akpabio said, take a bow. What he did was to quote the Order 52 of the Senate Standing Orders, and then that ended the entire screening. I do not know how I don't have a question off the back of that. And it's why a lot has happened since the screening. You know, a number of them have been coming forth, filling out their profile, and then questions have gone off the back of that. But I think this stands out, if you would agree. And that's a way of welcoming onto the program as well, Daniel Ayotoye. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you very much for having me.
Yes.
Good afternoon, audience.
It seems that Femi left a very hot seat, and now that you're seated on this seat, may I bid you say a good warm embrace or just a handshake with the editor of The Punch?
All right, sir. It's nice being in this hot seat. I'm also being with you, sir.
Yeah.
Okay.
It's nice.
Okay.
Nice
That said, Adedayo, I would always pander to my left. I am now beginning to ask myself.
You don't need to
and this
pander
is
to
why I feel like as I began to talk about the ministerial screening and all of that, you already had things, you know, that you were writing. So I wanted to, out of curiosity, I want to know exactly. I mean, so this order, it seems like it's statutory, and I think we should now start a conversation around it. We are having the screening of ministers. Is not being elected or selected, right? It wasn't an election. So we needed to understand why we would not hear supposed, you know, if he passes, it would be our minister. Why shouldn't we hear him talk to us and be able to screen him, question him, and understand if he even has the capabilities for the portfolio he's being considered for?
Well, of course, you know, we don't actually know the portfolio.
Yes.
Governor David Umahi is being considered for. But you see, being a member of the Senate, a member of the current National Assembly, it is protocol for the Senate to ask one of
their own.
Yeah, their own to take a bow. So it wasn't the first time.
Absolutely. And
it's not going to be the last time. Yes, do we all agree with it? No. But some of the reasons given by Akpabio, you know, was that the Senate already had records of some of them, and Umahi coming from, you know, an 8-year tenure as a governor of Ebonyi State, you know, I would want to assume that he's well known and his capacity may not be questionable. I mean, the capacity to deliver. So what is important is for the president, you know, to put the round peg in the round holes for those guys, for the nominees to deliver for him. So for me, I would rather not want to belabor that point, because it's a practice.
Yes,
yeah,
and I guess my interest, to be quite honest, so if this was confession
practice.
time, was to say, okay, how can we advance this conversation so we don't continue to have this? So we sat watching, expecting to have, it's a case of come and try yourself out. Let's hear you. Even though you're coming off the back of an 8-year tenure in Ebonyi State, there are still people who didn't believe you did well, as there would be people who believe, oh, there couldn't have been a better governor for Ebonyi State. So really, I think that if the media continues to, one way or the other, drop a point here and there, we could have a change, possibly, in the next dispensation.
But let me quickly add that, you see, it would have been a different ball game if the president had attached to the names of each of the nominees the portfolios they were being considered for. Right. It would have been easier for both the lawmakers and even, you know, contributors, media, and other stakeholders to raise a lot of questions as per what you expect this nominee to do and what is this person willing to bring to the table. But in a situation where it's almost like an open secret ballot. We have nominees. We don't know what they're being considered for. So if you are being considered for the health portfolio, for instance, and I'm taking you on say cybersecurity and IT, how do I really assess you? What kind of assessment can we achieve? So I think what we should be pushing for is for president to be bold enough, you know, not just to send names, but to send portfolios alongside the names and say, I'm considering so for health sector. And people who are knowledgeable in that sector, in the National Assembly can raise a lot of
Ask
questions
the right
and put
questions.
that person to the test.
Absolutely.
You know, so it's a dilemma, really. But like I said, if it's a protocol, do you know, as a senator, if as a Nigerian senator you are visiting, say, a country like the US, for instance, and somehow you happen to visit the Capitol Hill, they're going to give you some kind of
that's right.
You know,
honor
and
yes.
recognition based on the fact that you're also
You
a
are
senator from another country.
That's correct.
So if one of them is being considered for a ministerial position and they decide to ask him to take a bow,
okay,
I don't think we can do much
and who
about
am I
that.
also not to take a bow? When my editor says, let's take a bow.
You're already taking a bow.
And I am taking a bow. And the bow is leading me to Daniel right here. And you know, I mean, since the ministerial list started coming out, we've had them in 2 tranches.
Yes.
The first came last week and then the second yesterday.
Yep.
Right? And so the Labour Party said that the ministerial nominees were an assemblage of recycled, spent forces and anti-democratic elements. Did you expect a different set of individuals on that list, or are your expectations met?
Well, I think so far the president has been able to do to his best. You know, one of these things is that these persons that have been chosen to be ministers, there are people who had worked for the party one way or the other, and of course, politically speaking, of course, the president will want to compensate these people and say this is what.
Should we be talking compensation, or should we be talking capabilities as it relates to? Again, that you had said it would have been better if this was not a secret ballot or an open ballot where we don't even know what positions, right, that they're being considered for. So would you rather that it's a compensation for people who had worked for the maybe elections that brought in the president?
Yeah.
Or actually people who are technocrats, as it's assumed that people are expecting?
Yeah, you see these things, there are two-way things, okay? Politics and capability, okay, they go side by side too, of course. You will see politicians who are also experts. And this is what I believe the president has been able to do. If you look at their portfolio in the way, you can't expect somebody that has not participated in any way in ensuring that the president come on board to now come and say he wants to be having kind of, yes, compensation, and the other way. Of course, if the president did not win the election to come on board, he wouldn't have technocrats bringing on board. But let me
compensation right now. Do we need compensation at the expense of expertise, for example? I would ask.
And that's why I'm saying these persons are also expertise.
Okay.
Of course, if you look at their portfolios, these are people who are in their various fields, they are experts. And for sure, having studied most of them, I come to understand that the president is not only considering compensation. Okay, he also is considering compensation and at the same time also considering expertise. And so far, I believe that the president has been able to do to his best. But I will say this, you see, the screening so far has been a kind of a tradition, the way they go take a bow and all that. And I know that the Senate, yes, and I will say that the president, the Senate presidents, where I have reservation is the fact that the Senate presidents keep interjecting wherever one person or the other wants to ask a question. And that's where I have reservation. Keeps interjecting. And of course, you know, this is screening. You should allow people to ask these people questions. And I, of course, from what the editor has said, that the portfolio did not come with them, they would have been able to have asked more questions. Even when they had questions, the Senate president, Godswill Akpabio, keeps interjecting.
Could that be for want of time? One may just be, you know, tempted to ask, or could there be for other reasons? I mean, again, for me, which I think should be basic. Thank you so much, Daniel. I think the basic should be David Umahi being considered for. Let me give a name again. El Rufai being considered for. And I feel like that would give a transparent system where we're then able to say, oh, we know where we're going. We're not in the dark with anything at all. But I want to go to Adedayo, and that's to get a reaction on the issue of, the entire Labour Party statement and Daniel's comment saying that he believes that there could have been a lot of compensation playing on that list that the president had sent to the Senate.
Well, as far as I'm concerned, I do not disagree with Daniel, but I'll put it in a different way. I'm not going to be talking about compensation, but I'll be talking about stakeholders management.
Okay.
And this is how it works. You know, there was an election, President Tinubu did not go into that election alone. There were foot soldiers who supported him. It was a keenly contested election. So there were people who worked, within their own, domains,
circles,
their circles, committed funds, time to deliver the president. So these are your stakeholders, and that's the way it happens all over the world. Right. No government can run fully, with politicians, and no government can fully run with technocrats. You need a fairly, a mix, as in a fair mix of both tendencies and people who can bring value to your government and help you to deliver. And like I said, stakeholders management. Do you want to sideline people who worked for you? Who worked, through thick and thin to deliver you? You must find a way to give them relevance. I'm trying not to use the word compensation because it goes beyond that. Because in any case, if you look at some of them, well, there are some you cannot fault. There are some of the nominees that you can't fault their nomination because they are good, irrespective of whenever they are going to be deployed. They are proved. They're proven to be at least to be relatively good. I can't mention names because as editor of the Punch, I cannot endorse anybody. But I'm telling you that yes, there are a number of names that actually fit the bill. But so for the president, you must manage your stakeholder. Remember, there's a tribunal going on. What if we don't know? What if the tribunal calls for a rerun and you have not managed made some of what do you think will happen to you? So for me, it's stakeholders management, and that is the way. Even when Biden became U.S. president, he brought people, well-known people in the Democratic Party, people who have track records, people, so even some of who actually contested primary with him or against him. So for me, it's what would be the problem is if these people, the Labour Party is entitled to its opinion. Yes, for me, I also agree a bit with the Labour Party that we waited too long for a relatively regular list. Yes, regular list, but that's
no element of surprise.
But that is my opinion as Adedayo Oketola, not as editor of the Punch.
Oh, absolutely.
So it's important for people to know.
So now, let's just take this away for want of time, Daniel. And that's for us to go to the last story. And I just quickly want to ask, so we had a situation where the past Minister of State for Labour and Employment had said that it was unconstitutional to appoint ministers of state. And we have already had 42 names now, going by what we have. Would we also be looking at ministers of state as another list being released by the president? Or indeed, as we said earlier in the conversation today, around how the two parts, the government and the people, have to sacrifice for the Nigeria we seem to want. Is this not a good place for the government to say, hey, we're cutting costs, we're minimizing, we're going the minimalist way, just so that all of us are on the same page and we're all paying for this? In 2 sentences, I just want your reactions to that. Yes, Adedayo, and then I go to
yes, the Constitution requires the president to appoint at least one minister from each of the 36 states, and you have the Federal Capital Territory. And I also think this president, based on, of course, unconfirmed report, would also, bring in some other, few ones using the geopolitical zones and, slots. So for me, it's neither here nor there. It depends on the perspective from which you are looking at it. We have a lot of problems. If you have a president that wants to work and you think that these people will help you deliver on your mandate, why not? I also agree with those who are calling for a lenient government. We need to cut costs. We need to reduce the cost of governance across the board.
Thank you. Daniel, your 2 cents on that.
Yes, I think I totally agree with the editor on that. It's very important that we really need to cut governance. And at the same time, the president wants somebody that, people that would be able to ensure that he is able to deliver on the government, which is what we have given to him. So, and I think for me, the best is he has to manage whatever resources that's in and deploy them properly.
Well.
Yes.
Deploy them properly.
Okay, moving on, we're going to the last story of the day, and it's on the aircraft crash and elevator death. Both incidents happened in Lagos, and we will not be dwelling so much on this, but it's very important and key that we touch on them. So there was panic on Tuesday, and that was in the Oba Akran area of Lagos State, right, as a light single-engine airplane burst into flames after crashing into the road. This happened at 3:30 p.m. Thankfully, the 2 people on board survived. But how long shall we continue to say thankful as indeed, in a related occurrence in Lagos State, we couldn't be thankful for the life of a certain Dr. Waire Diaso, who died on Tuesday at General Hospital Odon in Lagos State. She was trapped in the elevator for more than 40 minutes before she was rescued, and there was no blood available to resuscitate her at the hospital when she was eventually taken off the elevator. I think that these are really catastrophic, and not to use catastrophic, that could really sound too big, but really sad incidents if you look at it. But I mean, to go over this and to ask really, first with the aircraft, and Daniel, let me start with you, and to say that it's almost become really rather frequent, except of course in recent times we've seen the frequency sort of reduced. I remember in the early 2000s, the 2003, 4, 5, it was almost every other month. And also in the past few years, we've seen a bit of those repetitions. But again, what we would hear is, like this morning, the federal government has ordered investigation into, and then the report comes out, and then you're asking yourself, there is such body as the Nigerian Civil Aviation Authority. What do we need to do where quality control is concerned to avert these crashes?
I think this is one of the areas where I will always say that, and I will say now that we have this kind of anyhowness in this country. We are too used to do things anyhow the way we want, and nobody is being held accountable for what happens. For example, the investigation is on. Like every other investigation, I believe to a very large extent that after the investigation, we will just roll out a press release and this is what happened and that is all. Nobody is prosecuted, nobody is arrested, nothing. So I think the reason why we're having this over and over again is because there is no one that is being persecuted for these issues that is happening. And we really need to look into this and do the right thing in this country.
Thank you, Daniel. So very quickly, Adedayo, so these investigations take place anyway, whether or not we agree that there should be an investigation, which indeed I think we should just go back to the drawing board. Where did this flight take up from? Blah, 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 what could have been done that wasn't done, and all of these things. But then, would there be anything different that we would see at the end of the report that we're expecting? What has become of the past reports anyways?
Well, I'll answer by saying that how many questions have we asked about the past investigations? You see, when there is such an accident as a crash, a plane crash, it's a matter of protocol for investigations to be carried out. For instance, I took my time to find out about the aircraft. It's called Jabiru. It's an Australian aircraft produced in South Africa. And even before checking it out, I told someone that that aircraft was a small aircraft, a very light aircraft that could only be used for maybe air tourism. You could use it for area survey, commuting from, for instance, if I want to go to Ogun State and I'm a retired pilot, for instance, I could use it because it could even land in very small, driveway all over the places. Right. So what I'm trying to say is, there's an accident. Sorry, there was an accident. There's an investigation going on. We have to wait for the report to ascertain what happened. Because it is difficult to begin to apportion blames at this point in time because we didn't know what happened. And one of the officials that was interviewed on one of the TV said that these light aircraft don't come with black box. So you can't rely on the black box to ascertain what happened. So you have to, get the debris, do piece
samplings,
put pieces together, maybe interviewed the pilot, the pilot and the passenger who were very lucky to have survived the crash, to be able to agree on or decide or conclude on what might have led to the crash. And the idea of the investigation is, of course, is not just to apportion blame and to bring some people to book. It's also to ensure that a lesson is taken from it and the accident does not repeat itself. But I doubt if we wouldn't have to wait for the investigation to be concluded, because the aircraft was brought to Nigeria in February. Someone brought those aircraft. And maybe the Jabiru aircraft came to Nigeria in February. I guess the idea is to maybe put them to maybe the idea is to put them to use in some kind of air tourism or something. So if
this already then raises questions as to the state of those aircrafts.
I wouldn't want to be categorical, because this is the technical thing. We have to wait, and we're alive, so we have to wait for the investigation.
Okay, so while
to
we are
be concluded,
waiting,
before we can ascertain what led to the crash
and begin to actually make assertions as
yes.
to what really
yes.
it was. So I mean, clearly, Adedayo, we could wait for that. Thankfully, nobody died. But what we may not be able to wait for, as well as not just us, as equally the NMA in Lagos State, who have now declared that would be strike by the medical associations, that medical staff that are present at the Lagos Island medical centers. About 3 of them, I'm aware of the Massey Center, the very place where this incident happened, and one other place. So, and then and there was a call in 2020 by the medical guild that the said elevator was malfunctioning. And from 2020 up until now, of course, apparently nothing was done, which then led to the death of Dr. Diaso. Indeed, my question would be, where do we go from here? What would you expect in this situation? Would anybody pay? Would it be explained again by an investigation and a report?
Well, it's unfortunate what happened, and of course our thoughts are with the doctor who unfortunately passed and our family. But yes, I agree with you. What you don't know, you would have to find. So if there is a need for a probe, yes, there should be a probe, yes. And when the probe is concluded, people must be held accountable. Because for me, it's a matter of negligence. There may be other issues, but it has to do with negligence of people who are supposed to be running that facility. And that will bring me to what Ayontoye said earlier about the anyhowness of Nigerians. We don't maintain anything in Nigeria. Recently, I passed through the new wing at the international airport, and I found out that the new airport that was recently, the terminal, new terminal that was recently open, to the public, had started falling apart, and I had to tell someone, what happened? What are we doing? And I'm like, we shouldn't allow this terminal to go by the way of the old one. There was a report in 2020. Between 2020 and now, that's over 2 years. Nothing has been done. Then it's a case of clear negligence. But as editor of the paper, I can't publicly be saying that but there should be a probe.
And off the back of the probe, somebody must be brought.
And I want to end by giving you a story. I'm particularly touched by any elevator related death because it's avoidable.
Absolutely.
I'm always particularly touched because some years back I had a neighbor a technician who was called in to do something for a company somewhere on the island. After he had gotten there, they were fixing their elevator, so there was no sign that the elevator was being fixed. He wasn't cordoned off. Nobody was there to caution people. The guys just jumped into his death.
Oh my goodness!
And being a Muslim, that would be buried that day. So after he was prepared for burial, his corpse was still, oozing out blood. It was that bad. So I'm always particularly touched by.
Because you have had a close.
Yes, because I've had a close.
Yes,
it is negligent. It is avoidable. That is why that has to be properly probed. I mean, comprehensively probed, investigated, and people brought to justice and brought to book, and and we need to ensure that it doesn't happen in Nigeria. It doesn't make us look good. Elevator.
What I read,
doesn't make us look good at all.
From experts, technicians who work with elevators is that it's impossible for an elevator to go back in a day. That it gives tons and scores of warnings, and then here we are. We've lost a medical doctor.
The probe should also
in a nation
tell us
that has less medical doctors to attend to as citizens.
Yes.
And so, your last words on that, Daniel.
I think, just as the editor said, you see, it still comes back to the same thing. Our ways of doing things.
According to you.
our ways of doing things in this country. It's really serious. We have this system of we can start a project. But maintaining the project becomes a problem. If you go to the streets, you will have street lights, they will fix it, commission it, and give it 1 month, 2 months, it's falling apart. Nobody is there to fix it. So I think we really need a government that will concentrate not only having policies or projects, but but a government that will say, yes, this project must survive time.
Right. And I think it brings also the issue of continuation in governance, right? I mean, gentlemen, this is where a very comfortable and convenient place where we have to say, okay, it's been a great time on the Roundtable. I've had an amazing time talking to you, Daniel, and to you, Adedayo. Thank you for dropping by today, and we're doing this again another time. My name is Melanie Ishola, and you've had Adedayo Oketola and Daniel Anyotoye. And we've had earlier Femi Morgan on the Roundtable. Thank you so much for joining us today. Next week, Thursday, is another time. Yeah. Do keep it a day.
Household across the 36 states and FCT to moderate prices. We are also providing 225,000 metric tons of fertilizer, seeding, and other inputs to farmers who are committed to our food security agenda. Our plan to support cultivation of 500,000 hectares of farmland and all year-round farming practice remain on course. To be specific, 200 billion out of the 500 billion approved by the National Assembly will be disbursed as follows. Our administration will invest 50 billion each to cultivate 150,000 hectares of rice and maize. 50 billion each will also be earmarked to cultivate 100,000 hectares of wheat and cassava. This expansive agricultural program will be